Okay, so here's the outcome of the poll. How many years have you been in-house? It looks like the majority have under 2 years or more than 4 years. So a nice diversity there. Question number 2, how many lawyers in your department? It looks like the majority are just in the 1 to 3 range at 39% of respondents, and then 37% are saying more than 10. And number 3, do you run your department? The majority of us, 78%, say no. But after you hear the wonderful insights of our panelists, you'll soon be on your way to running your own department. Let's hope. All right, so let's get started with our questions. I've heard time and again that in-house counsel don't just have to know the law. Part of the value that we bring to our organizations is as strategic business partners. So my question to the panel is, what does it mean to be a strategic business partner, and how do we get there?
I'll take a run at this. Partly, one of the values of being in-house is that you get to know the business and the people intimately, of course, depending on the size of the company. In my world of consulting, engineering, and architecture, a significant role is helping get the work in, get the work out, and get paid. It's not a complicated business, all the while minimizing claims and disputes. Again, a pretty simple formula. In all organizations, being a strategic partner, in my view, means being a business facilitator, not the quote business prevention department or the legal police. We're overhead, we're here to help, and a client service attitude is key.
Janet and David, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the way I would think about it, in addition to what Paul said, is you know, I think the beauty and the fun of being in-house is you have a seat at the table, and you have that seat early in the process. You know, when you're in-house, you get called when things go wrong or when people are ready to pay your bills. But often you feel that you wish you had been brought in earlier. And the beauty of being in-house is you are there earlier. And so make the most of your opportunity to have a seat at the table. And I think it's a combination of business advice and legal advice, oftentimes. So I think it's important as you give that advice to distinguish when you're giving true legal advice. That's important, as opposed to business advice, which you know someone may or may not take. But if you know their business and you've developed those relationships, oftentimes I found they're just as interested in your business advice as your legal advice.
David?
Yeah, no, I would echo those same comments and would say that, you know, in terms of being a strategic business partner, that does require you to learn the business, understand its strategy and objectives, and how it makes money, for example. And it goes beyond that too, to really understanding the industry, the competitive landscape, the trends, all that to feed into your ability to really give better advice by being better aware of the context in order to assess legal risks and help the business achieve its objectives. So I would say those sorts of things are important if you want to be a strategic business partner.
So all of you touched on knowing the business. And so for a newbie to, you know, a newbie in-house counsel like myself, what are some of the things that you would recommend that I do to get to know the business a little better?
Many of us have heard, or many of you have heard, management by walking around. I think that's important. Take a keen interest in the business and business processes. Talk to people. More importantly, listen to people. Learn about different departments, both operational and corporate. Don't silo yourself into a narrow legal box. As Janet said, take an active interest in not only the legal side of your organization, but also the business side.
Yeah, and I just add, I'm new, so I've been on the in-house side for well over 20 years now, but I'm new to this industry. I came from the utility industry and now in oil and gas, and I have found that I've had to really start over in terms of my understanding of the business, and I think it's the people. Find out who you need to be talking to. Talk to your boss about who are the right people for what I'm working on right now. People love to talk about what they do. Schedule some coffee, schedule some time. Developing those relationships is going to pay dividends when there's a problem. You don't want your first interaction with someone to be when there's something that goes wrong. And then I'd also say really spend some time figuring out what are the right industry email distribution lists to get on. Are there groups that you can participate in? Because we all know there's lots of free information that comes out from law firms or otherwise, industry associations. So find out how people in the business are getting their intelligence and get signed up for those.
Yeah, no, I would agree with Janet as well. And certainly, in addition to talking to people and listening, reading really is a way you can help get yourself up to speed. And so, whether it's something like, say in Alberta, the Daily Oil Bulletin, the publications that your business people are reading like that really are helpful. And that can include, more general sources of information about your industry or the competitors that you're involved with, like, even the Globe and Mail Report on Business or those types of publications.
Thank you. My next question is about skills. What are the top 3 skills that a new in-house counsel must have in order to be successful?
Yeah, I can maybe start off on this one, and I'd probably say, the number 1 skill really does boil down to communication. When you're new to in-house in particular, being able to present and communicate in a non-technical, non-legalistic way is important if you're going to gain the trust of your business clients or partners. And so ultimately, speaking the language in a way that they understand and that they can appreciate is important. A couple other things I'd probably say is that, skill or a sense of the business and having a practical approach to things in terms of assessing risk and helping to achieve business objectives is an important area. And lastly, I would say that I value people who do have collaboration skills. I certainly find that in-house, you're rarely doing anything on your own. There's always a team of people involved, whether that's other people in the law department or just the various business groups that are working on a particular project. So, the ability to speak and collaborate with people, up, down, across the organization, that is important to achieving all the objectives that are required.
And just as a follow-up to that, many of us have come from private practice. And so would you agree that the skills that you might need to be successful in private practice may not necessarily translate as well to in-house?
I would say, that a lot of the skills that you do need in private practice are equally applicable to your roles in-house. Like the skills I just mentioned, communications, collaboration, risk assessment, all those things, really are important in private practice as well in terms of advising your client groups. It's also important in-house. And so, really, a lot of the things that you needed to be successful in private practice and got you to where you are continue to be important, I would say.
I'll turn it over to the other panelists. Anything to add there?
I think David said it really well. I think those skills are things I really highly value as well.
Just a couple of quick things. David spoke of a practical approach. Another way of framing that is risk tolerance. Don't always take the conservative approach or colleagues will stop asking you. So we've got to be pragmatic. And about private practice, when I was in private practice for about 7 years before joining my organization, I was trained to give options and to make a recommendation. In-house lawyers are often asked to make a decision. And for some in-house lawyers, that shift from taking responsibility and accountability for the decision and the consequences of it is difficult. So that's a skill that I think many need to learn.
Thanks, Paul. On to the next question. Do you have some communication tips for in-house counsel?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. And it actually there's a little bit of an overlap to the last question, because I do think there are some things that we get taught in private practice that don't translate over quite as well. There's a great saying about you can be of average intelligence, but if you communicate clearly, everyone will think you're brilliant. And conversely, you can be brilliant, but if you're not communicating clearly, no one will know it. And that is so true. We've all seen those people who are just absolutely brilliant, but can't seem to get their point across in a clear and concise way. And I think that's, to me, the most important thing is getting your advice across very clearly and concisely. And don't bury the lead. You've got to make it really easy for people to understand what you need from them, and you need to only give them the information that they really need to make a decision. So I'd start with thinking about, who your audience is. Are you talking to the board? Are you talking to a colleague? Are you talking to a supervisor in one of the business units that you are assisting? Your level of detail is going to vary depending on who your audience is. And so really step back before you launch into your communication, and think about what, if I were in their shoes, what information would I need to make a decision? And it's going to vary by level. And I can tell you, it is not everything that you know. So if you go in with sort of a data dump, like, let me tell you how smart I am, let me tell you everything I know, it's not going to be helpful to people. A couple of just things that are helpful for me, and I think are helpful to a lot of executives, emails. Everybody gets hundreds of emails a day, and we're all drowning in emails. So make it really, really easy for people to know what you need from them. Are you asking for some action, or is this just an inform? Put that right up front. I actually have a little thing on my email where I'll flag things. If it's an action, I'll flag it red. If it's just something that I want to go back and look at when I have more time, I flag it a different color, and then I can sort by those. Those kinds of things, making it easy for me to do that helps me a lot. Having headings and key takeaways, bullets, highlighting where you need feedback. If there's a specific question that you need answered, highlighting that. So it's just really easy, because if it's buried in an email that goes for 4 inches on your computer screen, you might miss it, or you might not even read it, and at least not in a timely way, because you just don't have time at the moment. A lot of companies use PowerPoint, including all the companies I've been at. Lawyers sometimes think that PowerPoint is just another way of showcasing a Word document. So it's just lots of sentences. It's almost like they took their legal brief and put it into a PowerPoint format. So please don't do that. Just bullets, simple. Think about key takeaways. Again, what does this person or these people need to know to make a decision? And then the last thing I'd say is just know when it's the right time to pick up the phone or schedule a meeting, as opposed to sending a long email. Sometimes you might preface that by saying, hey, I need to talk to you about the following 3 things. I need to update you on this, this, and this. But sometimes the most effective form of communication is just picking up the phone or scheduling a meeting. And to loop back to where I started, I think that the skill that sometimes lawyers get really good at in private practice is writing that legal memo. with lots of citations and lots of footnotes, that does not serve you well on the in-house side. That's not, never forward a long legal memo to your client and say, you know, in case you're interested, you've got to summarize it, you've got to boil it down, you've got to make it simple for people.
That's a lot of really helpful tips, Janet. Thank you. Paul and David, did you want to add anything to that?
I have nothing to add. Janet said that really well.
Yeah, brilliantly.
Yeah, I think maybe the only other thing I'd add is that to Janet's point about knowing your audience, it really does help to understand how, say, your business team communicates. And sometimes that can be in ways that we're not used to as lawyers. And if it is PowerPoint, for example, you know, they may well want you to be creative and to include charts, you know, red light, green light, yellow light, all sorts of graphics, those sorts of things that help them understand in a way that, you know, is not typical for a lawyer, because they're not necessarily just legal words. So, you know, you have an opportunity to be creative to meet your needs, the needs of the audience.
Thanks, David. We're going to shift a little bit and we're going to talk about mistakes. What are the top 3 mistakes that you've seen new to in-house counsel make, and how can these mistakes be avoided?
I'll tackle that first. Number one, letting perfection get in the way of good enough. Don't become paralyzed for fear of making a mistake or not identifying every issue. Secondly, an inability, and I touched on this earlier, or unwillingness to make tough decisions and be held accountable. That line authority can result in paralysis as well. And like Janet was just saying, being too long-winded. A yes or no answer is better than a legal memo. If the answer is no, better to say, no, you can't do that, but you can't do this, but you can do this. Give an alternative if there's a roadblock in the way of door number 1.
Yeah, Paul, I just add to that. I think it's interesting. I think it's always helpful to focus on the what, not the how. So sometimes a business client will come to you and they'll tell you, I want to do this. And they've got it all planned out, the how they're going to do it. And there are legal challenges or risks associated with how they want to do it. But if you step back and you have the conversation about what is it you want to accomplish, you can often come up with very creative alternatives that get you to the same outcome, but in a very different path, and maybe a path that has less legal risk associated with it. So that, you know, that understanding the what are we trying to accomplish is critical. And sometimes if you don't pause on that, you'll get to a no, when really the answer is yes, you can do it another way.
David, anything to add there?
No, those were all good comments, so nothing further there.
Great. Well, we'll just move on, and we'll talk a little bit about this issue of rotating outside the legal department. Do you recommend that an in-house lawyer at some point in their career, be it early or later on, take a rotation outside of the legal department?
I'll start with that one. I've as you noted in your intro for me, I've spent a lot of time outside of the legal team. So we're all victims of our own experiences, and for me, it was really beneficial. So I'm a big proponent of it. I think I would suggest that you stay in the legal department for a few years, you know, get to understand the legal team and how things work there first. But I think it's a great opportunity. The other opportunity it brings is a lot of legal departments are pretty flat. And so if you're looking to lead people, as an example, you may not have as many opportunities if you stay on the legal team. But if you go out into the business, the opportunities are endless. And I'll tell you that in my experience, lawyers are very welcome on the business side of the house. And I think that's for a few reasons. one, we're trained problem solvers, right? We know how to solve problems, and that translates well over to the business side. We're very logical thinkers, which helps with the problem solving. We're good at mediating conflicts because we've spent a lot of time doing that. And we're good communicators, generally speaking. So, you know, I think those skills are just they translate very well to the business side. And if and when you decide to come back to the legal team, you're going to be a better lawyer for it. I guarantee it. You're going to have sat in the shoes of your clients. You're going to have received legal advice, sort of good and bad. But you're also just going to understand, frankly, how difficult it can be to do those jobs, and how you would appreciate a real practical legal partner to help you get your job done. I had an experience when I was on the client side of the house. I had experiences with really great attorneys who I just wanted them next to me because they made my life easier. And then I would have attorneys who, you know, Paul's talked a little bit about it, were a little risk averse, not willing to make decisions, or in some cases even recommendations. And I think that, you know, that unwillingness or that fear maybe of taking on risk is what held them back. And there was one point where I had to have a conversation with an attorney because we kept going round and round and round about trying to get to a particular outcome. And I finally said to her, I need you to tell me, is it impossible or is it difficult? If it's impossible, I just need to know that. And we can stop talking about this. If it's difficult, I need you to help me get there. But it was a really hard thing because there was risk associated with it. And I think because she was afraid of taking on that risk. So it's just that theme that keeps coming back up, is knowing the risk tolerance of your business, and knowing that your job in some cases most cases is not to mitigate all risk. You're never going to be able to do that, but it's to really lay out what those risks are and then options for mitigating them.
So Janet, you've sold me on this idea of rotating outside of the legal department, but we have a really good question from the audience, and I'll read it out loud. To Janet's point about getting onto the business side, how did she go about that, practically speaking, having conversations with the business units?
Yeah, so my first time out of the law department, interestingly enough, I almost didn't take it. So someone tapped me and said, hey, are you interested in moving over to the regulatory side of the business? And I initially said no. And you know, I think part of me said no because I really liked my job and I liked what I was doing. But I'll tell you, the other part was I was scared. You know, I was a good lawyer. I knew how to be a lawyer. And moving out, that was also my identity, right? You know, what was I going to tell people I do when I moved over to the regulatory side of the house? It's like, I'm a regulatory something, I don't know. So it was scary, and I had to think about it. And my husband, I'll give him a lot of credit because I was waffling back and forth, and he finally said to me, you know what, you're never going to know the right decision. So just, you might as well just make a decision and move on. And initially I found it very unsupportive and unhelpful, but I slept on it. And honestly, the next morning it was so liberating because what I realized was I was trying to decide in 5 years, is it better if I stay here in the law department, or is it better if I go to the business side? And the reality is you're never going to know that. So, you know, you just sometimes have to go with your gut, make a decision, and move on. And I can tell you in hindsight, it was the best decision I made because it opened up so many doors. Because once you did one thing and you showed that you were willing to take on new challenges and you know, learn new things, it just, one thing led to another. And you just had, the opportunities were endless. And I still think to this day, had I not taken that opportunity, I don't know where my career would have been, but it wouldn't be where it is today. That's for sure.
Janet, what about having that conversation with your general counsel or your AGC? I'm just thinking, you know, what if there's this perception that I'm not as committed to the legal team as I should be? Or what if my team is so overworked, they can't really deal with one less body on the team? Or what about the fear that if you leave the legal department, you're not going to get back in? What would you say to all of that?
Yeah, I'd say have the conversation. Every company's different, but from my perspective, I would so much rather lose a lawyer to the business than lose a lawyer to the company. And I fear that more than losing someone to the business. And as I said, I see a tremendous amount of value to people gaining that experience. And maybe they'll come back and maybe they're not. I wouldn't worry about somebody holding a place for you. If that works for your company, if it's really a 6-month rotation and you're going to come back, great. But sometimes you just have to take that leap and do it. But have the conversation. I think you might be surprised. People are more open to it. And I think if you approach it from, I'm really committed to the company and I want to learn more, and I think I have a lot to add and a lot of value to provide. I think it'll be a positive conversation. And honestly, if it's not, maybe you're not at the right company.
Paul and David, did you have anything to add to that?
I had this conversation coincidentally with somebody on my team just yesterday. And I told her that my job as a supervisor, as general counsel, is to help her and all of our colleagues develop a career path and to advance within the organization. So she's considering moving to a commercial management role, which still has some legal facets to it, but more on the business side, and would be reporting to our chief operating officer with a dotted line to me. And I said, listen, go for it. Be sorry to lose you in your role, but my job is to help develop you. And if you have a GC or an AGC who isn't delivering that message, like Janet said, maybe you're in the wrong job.
Thanks, Paul. David, anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I would echo both those comments, and that how I would hope that most organizations and most people leaders are supportive of your personal career development and your personal goals, and that you can have those sort of honest conversations with them about, where you might want to go or where you see yourself going. So, hopefully in terms of laying the groundwork, you can establish those relationships with the right people so that it would facilitate the conversation, when it really is relevant to you.
Thanks, David. We do have another question from the audience. Any tips on how to deal with difficult clients?
Now, the challenge when you're in-house is you typically can't fire your clients. You have that prerogative from time to time in private practice. It depends on the size of your group. If it's unmanageable, if you've tried diplomacy, if you've tried charm and none of that works, sometimes you need to go above that individual, depending on what the issue is. Sometimes it may be helpful to pass on the issue and the internal client to a colleague if you've got that capacity in-house. There's an old adage, life's too short not to get along well with your neighbors. I think that applies equally well with colleagues. I was at a leadership session several years ago, and the speaker spoke of a three-legged stool to job satisfaction or dissatisfaction. One is the work you do, 2 is the people you work for, 3 is the people you work with. And if any of those don't exist or aren't satisfactory, then your level of job satisfaction and motivation, it suffers. So if you're working with folks who are unnecessarily challenging, it can be a real demotivator. So you need to deal with it in any number of ways, including the couple that I mentioned.
Oh, anyone else want to comment on that?
I would just add, early in my career, I had a difficult client and I didn't deal with it in a timely way. And I let it sort of build up. And finally, we sort of kind of had like this has got to stop. And looking back on that, I think I was just avoiding the hard conversation in the beginning, and I think we could have gotten through it a lot easier and sooner if I had just set some boundaries in the beginning, and said, okay, here's what's happening, and it's hard. I admit it's hard, but you just have to sit down and probably do it at coffee or something, a virtual coffee today, but take them out and say, I really value our relationship. Here's some things I think that would help improve it. Come at it from a place of presuming positive intent. Nobody wakes up in the morning, I don't believe, wanting to be a jerk or wanting to make your life difficult. So there's probably just a lack of awareness about how their behavior is impacting you. And frankly, there may be something about your behavior that's impacting them. So, just having that honest conversation about, how do we partner together, because we're a team.
Thanks, Janet.
Yeah, I think I'd just say that sometimes it is a matter, obviously, of assessing the context and understanding where you're going to be drawing lines. And certainly to the extent, something involves, an ethical conflict or an integrity issue, it may well be that it is a matter that you do need to escalate to others or to be stepping out of the issue. In other cases, though, sometimes it is also a matter of recognizing that your legal advice isn't always going to rule the day. And so if the conflict is more that you're unwilling to accept that, your legal advice isn't going to be followed, sometimes depending on the situation, that is not necessarily a illegitimate result. In other cases, it would be, but it is a matter of assessing that and knowing to what extent that might be driving some of the conflict.
Thanks, David. We have another question from the audience here, and it kind of relates to another question I wanted to ask you on the issue of promotion. So the question is, what's the path to senior counsel? And I think people on the call are also thinking, what's the path to AGC? What's the path to SVP? So how does someone get promoted within your team? What are the characteristics or qualities that you're looking for in your superstars?
I'll start with that. It's not seniority to start with. Those who last the longest don't necessarily get promoted, and we need role players on our teams, and they're important parts of what we do. But I'm looking for attitude and work ethic. Everything else can be learned. We've talked about clear and concise communication. If you can't do that, you're really no good in any profession. I shouldn't say that. That was kind of harsh, but it limits your opportunities for advancement. Collegiality is important. Being able to play nice in the sandbox. Results oriented, getting things done, that gets recognized. Emotional intelligence goes along with collegiality. Janet made this point earlier. You don't need to be the loudest voice in the room to be persuasive. Sometimes very well timed input is a heck of a lot more effective than nattering on like I'm doing. Eager, be early to volunteer for tasks. That gets recognized as well. I think all of those things and others in a basket tend to allow the superstars to bowl up to the top.
The only thing I'd add to that is, because I think those are all really good qualities that I look for as well. I also really value the person who's willing to take on new assignments and new roles and learn new things. And it really provides you as an attorney with a broader perspective of the company. And you'd be surprised how many times someone is offered an opportunity and will say, oh, no, it's just not the right time, we're not ready. And that's okay, because maybe that time it's not the right time. But if it becomes a serial, no on taking on opportunities, you really limit yourself in terms of your ability to progress in the organization.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good comment, Janet. And, sometimes I think that when you come in-house in particular, you still have a little bit of the mindset of a lawyer in private practice, where it's, sort of billable work, working on a file or a project, or non-billable work, which, is like administrative management sort of tasks. But, when you get in-house, there are those opportunities or initiatives where you can take on those sort of bigger projects that are administrative. They're initiatives that are important to the company that are maybe non-legal in a lot of ways, but those really are opportunities to demonstrate your value, and can play just as big a role in helping you be recognized and promoted as the strict legal work.
David, that's a really good point. And at my prior company, we actually made it a requirement for promotion to a certain level that you have some sort of, you take on some sort of leadership initiative in the department. So whether it was a productivity initiative or something, but what we were looking for were those leadership qualities. It wasn't how great a lawyer you are, but are you willing to invest the time and the effort to make the department a better place?
So I do have a follow-up to that, because I know that there are some very talented, very ambitious people out there who don't just want to be legal counsel or senior counsel. They want to rise to the top, just as you all have done. And so the thing about that, though, is how do you carve out that path? The opportunities on in-house legal teams can be few and far between. Sometimes there's just only one AGC, there's only one SVP of legal services. So how does an aspiring AGC, GC, SVP make it known or declare that that's what they want to become, leaders within the organization, without offending anyone, or make it seem like they're wanting to get people out of their way?
I think it varies from organization to organization and the size of the legal department. At Stantec, I think we've got 6 associate general counsel, and that's only a few years old, and our group is about 40 lawyers across the globe. If your organization is effective, you'll have formal opportunities at least a couple of times a year to have performance feedback with your supervisor. That's a good opportunity to make your aspirations known and to have that frank discussion. Listen, I'm not looking to kick you to the curb, and you'll go when you're ready, but I just want you to know that I'm motivated. I'm keen to do what it takes to be considered amongst your successor candidates, prospects. So there's nothing wrong with having that type of discussion with your supervisor. If you have a relationship with executive leadership, there's also nothing wrong with having that discussion with them. I wouldn't take offense if one of my colleagues did that with or without my participation or knowledge. We all have to be our own advocates, but overriding all that is this notion, and we've spoken about it a few times, of collegiality and respect.
Yeah, I agree with that. The only thing I'd add is I think if you are out talking to other people about wanting other opportunities, whether it's the AGC role or the GC role or otherwise, I think it's wise to have that conversation with whoever is your direct supervisor as well, because what you don't want is for that conversation to come back to them and they didn't hear it from you first. So I just think that's a smart move. And if they're not supportive of that, then you can have the conversation with their boss or someone else, or you can decide maybe this isn't the place for me because it doesn't support me doing what's best for my career. But I just would caution against getting too far down the path of pursuing another opportunity without talking to your supervisor.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are good questions, and they're tough questions insofar as there's not easy answers for some of these things in law departments, which are typically pretty flat. Um, so it does require a lot of good communication and a lot of laying the groundwork. And some of that is also accepting the fact that, say, unlike a private firm where, you know, it's more or less set where you can move up in lockstep, you know, as you gain more experience, you're a junior associate, senior associate, junior partner, you know, mid-level partner, all that. It really doesn't work that way in-house. And sometimes, you know, in terms of wanting to move up, whether to AGC or GC or whatever, it's a matter of looking at the opportunities and perhaps moving laterally, even if that's not your first or, you know, desired step. It might be that you have to think about those things towards the ultimate goal of maybe moving up, you know, within the law department.
Thanks, David. We have a question from the audience that's a tie-in, and it's, is it possible to rise to the president CEO level as in-house counsel?
My answer would be yes, but not if you're viewed as a sort of, I'll call it a lawyer's lawyer. You better have been that business partner. You better know that how to run the business. It's interesting. I was listening a couple weeks ago to a panel of women board members, and they were all GCs. One of the pieces of advice that seems obvious, but maybe isn't obvious to everyone, is that when you go from being a GC to being on the board, they're not hiring you to be a lawyer or a GC. They're hiring you to be a board member. So you better think beyond your legal expertise when you're contributing to the board. And the same is true if you are viewed as that lawyer who knows the business and is as influential and impactful on business decisions as you are on legal decisions, then you can rise. But if you're just kind of a lawyer's lawyer, I don't think it's going to happen. Or if it does happen, you're probably not going to be terribly successful.
Thank you. Anything else to add to that? Okay, so I've promised to prioritize questions from the audience, and we have another one that's popped up. I'm going to just read it verbatim. As a woman, it is sometimes difficult to get my word in a meeting. If you have something to say that is valuable, do you interrupt politely or wait patiently for a moment to speak, which may not happen? I've been there, by the way. It's tough. It's a tough situation to navigate.
Yeah, I guess I'll take that as the woman on the panel. I think, you know, it depends on the situation, but sometimes you do have to interrupt politely. I love actually with the Teams and Zoom where you can raise your hand. I think that's an effective tool sometimes as well. We don't have that in real life meetings, but you know, you can also, you know, just raise your hand and say, you know, I have a point to make when you're done. I wouldn't hold yourself back. You don't want to be the person who's talking just to talk, or who is the first always to make a comment. We all know those people, whether that you know, whatever the meeting, they're going to speak up. They're going to speak up first. They always have a lot to say. So I do value, I think Paul said it, those people who, when they speak, everybody really listens, because it's usually a really good point. And so, you know, find your opportunities, but if you have to politely interrupt, then to make your point, then that's what you got to do. I don't know if the guys have a different perspective on that.
Well, I'm going to put Paul and David on the spot here and redirect back to them. I mean, I'm sure that you all have team members, some of them who are very outspoken and others who are not. So what are some of the things that you're mindful of in doing to ensure that, to provide equitable opportunities for people to speak up on your teams?
We've, many of us have heard of the Socratic method, where you put people on the spot, you ask them questions to try to extract some participation, because you know they have thoughts on the subject. Maybe you've had side discussions but they might be men or women. They might be a little timid to bring it up in a group setting. So don't be afraid to ask questions or ask for input, ask for comments. As a supervisor, as a leader, I think that can be very effective at bringing good input to the table, and ultimately that's what we want.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And I would say that, really everyone should be, an advocate for being inclusive and for demonstrating leadership and qualities that do promote everyone's ability to participate and to be heard. And so that's a matter of not just, recognizing situations where someone maybe isn't participating and encouraging them, but also, recognizing perhaps, your own biases in terms of how you conduct meetings or how you allow people to contribute. And hopefully, in that sort of manner, you can yourself promote inclusive practices, which will encourage and foster that kind of environment where everyone can feel free to speak up.
Thanks, David. I'm going to shift now to financial literacy. One of the reasons I became a lawyer was to get as far away from math and numbers as possible, but I'm beginning to think that was a pipe dream. How important is it for in-house counsel to develop financial literacy? Do we really need to understand accounting? Can we leave it to the finance department?
Well, it's funny you should mention that, Daniela, because I initially started out thinking I might become a chartered accountant, and then decided, oh, that's not really what I want to do, and I should get away from that. So I ended up going into law. Lo and behold, we find that, we're constantly dealing with financial concepts and needing to be financial literate. So, ultimately, I think that it's important for every in-house lawyer, because businesses, companies, they ultimately have as one of their main goals to make money. And that means you need to understand things like accounting, finance, all those sort of numbers-oriented areas. It sort of does obviously vary in terms of your practice area within the company. If you're advising, groups like treasury or financial reporting or investor relations, you're going to have to, have a fair facility in financial concepts. But even just generally, whether you're working on projects, acquisitions and dispositions, which have post-closing adjustments, working capital adjustments, or even contracts, with revenue structures or earnouts. Those sorts of things all require you to be literate to a certain degree.
As a follow-up to that, I've heard much talk about MBAs, to do one or not to do one. What's your view on that?
I think that depending on your personal goals, an MBA can be helpful. I think that there's also other ways, particularly on the financial literacy side, where you can, obtain the level of proficiency that you need, and that can be in formal ways, like programs or short courses that are run by organizations like LISA or the CBA or the CCA. All those sorts of things, can help you get the proficiency that you need without necessarily needing to devote the whole time and cost and intensity that an MBA would require.
Do you think that an MBA might be able to help in other areas, like building up financial acumen or skills that might get you to the top of your organizations?
Yeah, I definitely think that would be another arrow in your quiver, and particularly if you would like to transition into a business role and then potentially all the way up to the CEO role, like we were talking about. But ultimately, yeah, it sort of does depend, I think, in where you see yourself going.
Thanks. We're running short on time, so I think we have one more question for the panel. I wanted give you the opportunity to kind of reflect in your own roles as leaders. So as the leader of a legal department, how do you want to be supported by the lawyers on your team?
think I was going to take that one, but I'm just trying to find my notes here. Oh, I got it. We've talked about some of these things already. Take initiative to do assign tasks with minimal supervision, but ask lots of questions if you're uncertain about what's required. I get nervous when a new colleague is locked in their virtual office or real office and not talking to other people, not asking questions. So I encourage that. Be responsive and helpful to internal clients. We're in a service business in in-house counsel roles. In a perfect world, when you're giving advice and recommendations, you'll be right. We're not pouring concrete in most cases, so even if you're wrong, most things can be fixed. But it's always helpful if you're right. Look for improvement opportunities. We spoke about this already a little bit, both within your group and within the organization. Don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. That's how we grow and improve.
And in the last 2 minutes, Janet and David, did you want to add to that?
The only thing I would add to Paul's answer is just being proactive on communications. So, I may not think to ask how something is doing, but if there are new developments that I should be aware of, shooting me an email or scheduling a briefing is super helpful. If there's some big briefing or memo or whatever going to my peers or the CEO, it's really helpful if I have a heads up on that. I don't need to approve it. I don't want to approve it. But if I get questions about it and I don't know it, then I have to loop back with you. So it's super helpful for me if I just get the heads up, like, hey, we're briefing, the CEO on this issue tomorrow. Here's the memo or the presentation.
David?
Yeah, no, Janet actually just expressed exactly what I was thinking, that, keeping me informed and giving me heads up about potential issues or roadblocks that are coming up, that to me is, at the top of my list, really, in terms of making sure that you're helping me out and supporting sort of the department goals.
Thanks, David. I think it's time for us to wrap up. So with that, I want to thank our panelists for the wonderful insights that you've shared with us all. Thank you so much. I'd also like to re-thank our sponsor, Blake's, and in particular, David Tupper, who's worked with us to make this session and other new in-house sessions happen. And Heather at the ACC, who has been a tremendous assistance in organizing this event. So thanks again to everyone. I hope you've found this helpful.
And thanks you, Daniela, for moderating. Appreciate it.
Welcome, my pleasure.
Thank you.